Good morning, everybody. Happy last day of 2021. It is December 31st. And after yesterday's live, about the number one thing to do for back problems, I got a couple of private messages asking if those exercises will help for hip pain. And so I thought that was a good opportunity to share my top exercise to do for hip problems. And of course, there are many things to do. I have just found that this one thing, I start my clients off with it. It helps strengthen the muscles in the hip. It also helps stretch the hip and helps you move in a way that you haven't been for a while, which can make the hip lock up, tighten up, and overall just not feel good. So this is the number one thing that I do when somebody comes to me for a hip problem. And many of you have probably done it before. Honestly, you probably weren't doing it right. Most of my clients come to me and they're like, oh yeah, I've been doing that exercise forever. It doesn't do anything for me. And then I have them go through it and they're like, oh shoot, this is the same but different. And part of that is because they're just not doing it right, unfortunately. And you get told to do this exercise in the physical therapy clinic. As many of you guys have heard me say before, 2 times a week for a month in the physical therapy clinic doesn't do much. I'm a physical therapist. I'm not bashing on physical therapy. I think physical therapy is needed and it works when the system isn't broken. So what is this exercise and why have you been doing it wrong? So it's the clamshell, specifically the sideline clamp. So you can do the clamshell laying on your back. And I sometimes have people start off with that. Usually I have them start off with that after a hip replacement. Like when I've seen somebody day of hip replacement surgery or day after hip replacement surgery, I have them do it laying on their back. But pretty much everybody else, or for a hip replacement further down the line, I have them do it in side lying. And so what this does is you strengthen your muscles in the direction that you go. So we go forward the majority of our lives, right? You rarely walk sideways. You rarely walk backwards. So 2 big instances where we would walk sideways is if you're at the movie theater or shuffling down that aisle. Most of us walk sideways for that. So that's one way we'd be walking sideways, but otherwise we aren't walking sideways much besides a step or 2 here or there. So that's number one. Number 2, we don't walk backward all that often. I can think of an instance where we would walk backward is if you're opening up the door for somebody and you have to take a couple of steps back, but still we're only walking backward a couple of steps. We don't spend the majority of our time walking backward. So what does that mean? That means that we aren't strengthening the sides of our hips and we're not strengthening the back of our hips, our butt. So the clamshell works multiple muscles, specifically ones that do that sideways motion and a rotation motion. And because it does the rotation motion, that means it gets extension involved. It gets that backward motion. It gets your butt involved. So doing clamshell inside lying helps strengthen the muscles on the outside of your hip, gives your hip flexors a break. So somebody who has FAI, femoral acetabular impingement, hip impingement, hip arthritis, usually the front of the hip is on fire. Hip flexor problems, somebody who sits a lot and really has a crunched down front of their hip. These are all things that I would do this exercise right from the get-go. And so you do it to tolerance and you have to make sure that you're doing it right. Like I said before, many people have done this exercise. Most people are doing it wrong because you just haven't had somebody watch over you to watch you do it to make sure that you're doing it right. So I'm going to hop on my treatment table behind me. I'm going to show you this exercise and I'm going to walk you guys through it. Okay, so you can do this for hip problems, hip pain, hip weakness, difficulty walking, hip flexor problems, hip OA, FAI, things like that, a wide variety of hip problems. If you're not sure if you should be doing it, check with your local physical therapist, go get an evaluation and see if this would be a good one for you. You can always just try it at home. Okay, so I'm going to show you. Okay, so we're going to lay on our side. My knees are bent. My ankles are stacked one on top of the other. My knees are stacked one on top of the other. I'm going to have my hand resting here. You can be completely flat. Other arm just kind of in front of you here. So the number one thing you want to look for when you're doing this one is to make sure that you're not rocking your back and forth. So what you want to do is tighten your tummy, pull your belly button towards your spine like we worked on in the back exercise video, and then force your weight forward. So instead of the pressure being a little bit on your butt, put the pressure forward so you feel it a little bit more on your hip and a little bit more on your thigh. Tighten the tummy, force those hips forward. And then as you do the exercise, you're going to watch this part of your body to make sure that it's not rolling backward. So the exercise is ankles stay together, top knee comes up. That's as high as I can lift it without rolling. It's not a high motion. Lots of people will do this. Notice I opened up my hips there. We don't want to do that. Roll those hips forward, tighten the tummy, and rotate up. This is your side lying clamshell. The top exercise I recommend people doing for hip problems. Okay. Okay, guys, that is it for today's tip. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon.